Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Hello, hello. Welcome to the State Library of Victoria. Welcome to this evening's presentation, One Object, Many Stories. This is a series of talks, a series of occasional talks, I would call them, that the library puts on. Previous subjects for these talks, and they're all about an object, a book, or a piece of realia from the library's collection. There's been we talk about the medieval flea, which was a flea caught for 700 years in the binding of an illuminated manuscript. There was one about a book with a sheepskin cover made for the 1956 Olympics. But tonight, as a Japan fan myself, I'm very, very excited because we are going to be talking in this very illuminated panel here will be illuminating us on the art of the Japanese Matchbox label. Why are we talking about this? Well, we're talking about this because the library in 2012 bought a scrapbook, let me get this right, a Japanese Matchbox labels scrapbook. Exactly. And we will hear a little later about why such a thing would exist. It didn't exist, we don't think. For collection purposes, it had a commercial purpose. So we'll be hearing about that. Okay, let's take this back another level. Why are we talking about these matches? Because if you look at the labels up there on the screen behind us, the library here has just issued the 2018 diary, which you can buy in the foyer, and which features Art Deco design taken from the library's collection, including some of the Japanese match label designs we'll be talking about tonight. So this is a Deco theme. I've had a look at it. It's very beautiful. I'd get a copy if I were you. Before going any further, I would like to recognise that we are meeting tonight on Aboriginal country, on the country of the people of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong languages of the Kulin Nation. This is Aboriginal country. It always has been, it always will be, and it is appropriate it's always appropriate to bring it up, but of course, tonight, we're talking about matches. We're talking about fire. And for the Aboriginal people, as for every people, fire is the determinant of power over your environment. You could say that it's fire and not, say, literacy or not agriculture that sets a civilization or a group of people or a culture on a self-determinant path. In my mythology, which is the classic mythology, fire is Promethean. It is the moment where you steal power from the gods who have always been laying waste to you, people and your environment, and you have that in your hand, fire. For the Aboriginal people of Australia, they carried fire from place to place in hollow sticks. They generated fire by rubbing a piece of wood. They farmed this country with fire. Tonight, we're talking about fire. We're talking about fire that you put in your pocket. We're talking about fire that you aestheticize to a high degree. So, my name's Bernard Callio. I'm the chair for this evening's discussion. I'm a comic book maker and a performer. I make pictures and words, and I like world creation, particularly when it's done with stories. And let me introduce our panel, our experts, our delvers into the world of these designs, these beautiful matches. So Jenny Grigg, here to my right, is a graphic designer. She is an industry fellow, and she's doing a PhD at RMIT University in materiality and ideation. Whoa, sounds magical. And she was a 2011 State Library of Victoria Creative Fellow. I did one of those in 2013. It's really good. Yeah. Jerry Bell here, right to the right of Jenny, has been, and listen to this word, folks, a filluminist for nearly 70 years. Filluminist, which means a lover of light. He has a collection of over 90,000 Matchbox covers. Hey, buddy, you got a light? Yes, he does. He is a member of the Australian Match Cover Collectors Society and is the author of a number of books, including Lighting Up Australia, the story of the Australian match manufacturing industry, 1843 to 2003. And finally, on the extreme right, Wayne Crothers. Crothers. Either way. Wayne Crothers has spent 18 years in total in Japan, including 2 years at Kyoto Seika University, where he researched traditional Japanese art practices, and another 2 years doing a Master's of Fine Arts degree at Tama Art University in Tokyo. Wayne is now, more pertinently to all of us in the audience, the Senior Curator of Asian Art at the NGV, at the National Gallery of Victoria, and very wonderfully, for me, he curated he's done curated many exhibitions, but he's just done the Hawkeseye exhibition, which was a wonderful exhibition. I think round of applause. A great exhibition we've just had. So that's our panel. We're going to, these people are going to show you images, delve into the questions and ideas behind these matchboxes. Hopefully we'll get a bit of time for you guys, you audience members, to ask questions before we close this discussion at 7. And then we will walk across the foyer and go up some stairs where we will be able to look at the very piece, this collector, this what did I call it before? Scrapbook? Where we'll look at the actual scrapbook, and also Jerry has a number of pieces from his own collection. So I do encourage you to come along and look and experience these beautiful, beautiful objects for yourself. It's always part of this program. Okay, so let me give you a little introduction. So let's go to Japan. Oh, can we? Yes. Yes, we can. So here's the scrapbook. And our panel will talk a lot about what this scrapbook may have been used for and the status, I suppose, of these labels. But let's talk history. Let's go to 1630 in Japan. And this is the beginning of more than 2 centuries of a policy by the Tokugawa shogunate, saying that they wanted a sakoku policy, a closed country policy. This policy prevents Japanese people from leaving Japan, prevents foreigners from coming in. Closed. In 1853 and in 1854, an American chap, Commodore Matthew Perry, turns up in his black ships. It's a metaphor. Black, they're black, this is a bad guy. No. He turns up in his black ships and he says, listen, you guys, listen, Japan, we want to trade with you. You should open yourselves up to the rest of the world. There's a bit of back and forth, a bit of soul searching, but eventually the Japanese people say, yes, let's do that. And they embark upon this big modernisation program to cope with this incursion of the West into a place that has been a closed culture for 200 years. So Japan sends people over the world to gather wisdom, and they transform their country. But there's a sort of a catch to all of this, because we think Japan, we think samurais. After the Meiji government was established, the samurais really didn't have a job anymore. There was feudalism was sort of not in fashion anymore. We wanted to give these people who were really very good at chopping things up with their swords another job. They looked around and they thought, well, we could go from this to this. This chap here behind me, on the right, on our right, is Makoto Shimizu, a samurai from in Kanazawa, and he left Japan, went to Europe, and studied all sorts of things. But when he came back, so he went over there in 1869. When he came back, he'd set up a temporary match factory, and this was very successful. So he opened up a permanent match factory, and it was called Shinsuisha Company in Tokyo in September 1876. So we have this amazing turning point, this fulcrum in the Japanese story, with these chaps here, samurai, transforming as the whole of Japan is transforming. And they transform, oh, look at that. And they transform into matchmakers. And now I'd like to pass over to Jenny to talk about the design of the covers in the book. Jenny.
Thanks, Bernard.
No props.
I'm not a performer, so that's quite an act to follow. So I'm a graphic designer, so I can sort of share. I've taken a look at these from a graphic design perspective, so I'll talk through those aspects of it, and then I'm really interested to hear how you each respond to what I've found, because it's really just a cursory look from me, from a graphic design
Are these ones
perspective.
from the scrapbook?
No, these aren't. So I've started with a slide that is not from the book, just to indicate the progression, so the period for the 1920s and 1930s, how much it actually moved away from here. So only one of these frames has Roman characters in it. The others I've learned are actually Chinese since we've been sitting here chatting. I assume they were Japanese, but that's, yeah. Okay, so this was loaned to me from David Lancashire, who's a graphic designer in Melbourne. He just sent those through an email, and I thought it was a nice sort of starting point. Okay. So then this frame here, this is an image. It's quite poor quality, but that's just, there weren't too many available online. It's an image of Tomasita Muramaya and his wife, whose name I don't know, I'm sorry. I've put it here because it gives us an insight into the group of avant-garde artists called Marvo, who were instrumental in progressing Japan's visual art culture around the time the book was produced in the 1920s.
What was that word again?
Marvo.
M-A-V-O.
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 Yep. So Muramaya travelled to Berlin, and by the time he came back to Japan in 1923, he maintained correspondence with European avant-gardists El Lissitzky and Theo van Doesburg, so really well-known European avant-gardists. El Lissitzky's Russian, van Doesburg worked out of Holland. And so these next three slides are images of the magazine that Marvo produced. But Metz is a very well-known magazine that Kurt Schwitter's produced. And, you know, it's quite apparent that the similarities, I mean, to put these two together, and I've got three examples of them.
So this is a literary magazine, or?
It's communication of the avant-garde's ideals.
Okay.
They're not in English as far as I know, and I haven't read them, but it was with industry sort of coming in around that time. It was an accessible platform for avant-gardists to actually promote their ideals in a mass production way.
So, sorry, Metz is the European,
yep,
and Marvo is the Japanese.
That's right, yeah.
I find it amazing the way that they're juxtaposing both fonts here. You know, they're using a Japanese sort of alphabetical font with a Roman font and then numbers, and it's really sort of extending that play on using fonts and numbers that was popular during that sort of era, you know, that you see in that Dada sort of art and that design movement in Europe. But they're sort of taking an extra step. They've got a whole new vocabulary, a whole new sort of range of characters.
And really quickly as well.
Yeah,
almost at the same time. I mean, when Muramaya came back to Japan from Berlin, and I believe he studied there, but I'm not too sure about that, he maintained correspondence. So van Doesburg, who's well known from the Distill movement, I think El Lissitzky sent the Metz editions across to Muramaya by post. So they were corresponding avant-gardists, and dually, I mean, contemporaneously, So,
Well, the title Marvo at the top in the Roman alphabet, and then the katakana Marvo written upside down, coming up from the bottom on the left-hand side of the Japanese cover. It's sort of really creative use. The next slide.
yep.
Yeah. It's just sort of this amazing sort of, it's almost like viewing the magazine cover from 360
Turn it
degrees.
around,
Which
yeah.
is a very old traditional concept that was used for round ceramic plates when they were doing a design. They were sort of designs where you could see them from upside down or whichever side of the table you were sitting on. And so his approach is sort of been taken into a book cover design or a magazine cover design as well.
And at the same time, though, so Roman characters, four characters, and starting with M. So there's a lot of similarities as well. I mean, they were openly accepting, and there was a dialogue.
Yeah.
And even the structure. I mean, the very kind of rectilineal structure there, and the use of the number. And Van Doesburg did the same. So there was a real sort of it's a very easy comparison to make. So then to move into some of the labels from the book. So what I've done is I've made a comparison between, say, on the left there is a design, El Lissitzky, and then labels from the book on the right. And the notes I've taken about those, making a more direct comparison, that El Lissitzky, Russian constructivist, he's known for experimenting with architectural characteristics of letter forms, and they've clearly influenced this particular designer. There's 3 of this designer's work there, so I think it's quite easy to assume that that designer has actually been, he's really taken a leaf from the way El Lissitzky pulled typography apart and really saw it for its physical attributes rather than its linguistic qualities. And so onto this one. Now, I don't know what this is advertising because the Japanese characters I can't read.
Do you know, Wayne?
I did do it. Just keep on speaking. I did do a little bit of research on this one. Sorry, I did a bit of research, but keep on speaking.
But from a graphic design perspective, it's really easy to assume that whoever did design it and for whatever it's actually representing, they must have seen this very well-known Bauhaus poster from 1923 on the left because the diagonal axes are identical. And also the 2 circular graphic shapes sort of adjacently, top left and then lower right. And then there's another example of that as well. So this is the Matchbox, one of the Matchboxes from the actual book, and then another example again, and again exactly the same diagonal axis. So as a graphic designer, I think it's very reasonable and and common in practice to actually have work that's inspiring you right in front of you and really literally having it on the tabletop or right next to you. And so I don't think it's difficult to assume it's a sort of a direct lead between those 2. But of course, speculation. Do you want to talk about that before I move on? Or?
No, keep on going up. My notes are in
It's
chaos
on the floor.
So, can I just pull past Jerry at this point and just ask about this cover here? Is that I'm playing billiards in a billiard room and this is the Matchbook, the Matchbox that advertises that place? Do you think that's what's going on there?
No, I think they're all either intended to advertise a place or they actually are advertising a specific place. Because nowhere on any of the boxes have I ever found the Japanese character for match, nor have I ever found any indication of the manufacturer or the factory that made them. So I would think they're 100% advertising.
Yeah, well, a lot of them, about half of them are advertising, sort of, as this one, like a billiard saloon or something like that. The other one was Chikuma Club, was the name, and it's a sort of a nightclub or a bar where you would go and have drinks and snacks and whatever. And of course they were sort of seen as being very fashionable to do sort of spots in the 1920s, hence the sort of the atmosphere.
The progressive graphic design.
Yeah, and the sort of identity or interior design or that you would want to identify your own personality with at that time, because it's a very fashion-driven, no surprise, Japan's always been a fashion-driven society and nothing's changed really since the Edo period. And the 1920s was very much this type of new introduced fashion that everyone wanted to be a part of, with the clothes they were wearing, the places they went, whether it was new cinema complexes or they were shopping in department stores, or the clubs and the cafes that they were hanging out in. And then, of course, as you did with these matchboxes or little match sort of pamphlets, you'd souvenir it and take it and strike a match in front of your friend. And they would say, oh, you've been hanging out at the Chikuma Club, have you? So, yeah, they were sort of like pairing it up with your identity that you wanted to
Which
display.
still happens today.
Yeah, it still
it's the same
happens. So it's
mechanism.
related to dandyism, and dandyism's sort of been a big sort of male type, mainly a male sort of thing since the Edo period. And, it still exists with young Japanese guys, as you see the way they manicure their eyebrows and have their hair done in certain ways.
Yeah. Very good. Now, where are we here? Shimbashi, are we in Tokyo?
Shimbashi, middle of Tokyo.
Middle of Tokyo.
Actually, one stop away from Tokyo Station.
Great.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll go there for a game of billiards after this.
It's still a bit of a nightclub spot to hang out at, Shimbashi, yeah.
Back to you, Jenny.
Okay, so so this label, Appetizers Billiard Hall, I presume, and again it references L. Liszewski use of geometry, but I mean graphic design, commercial artists, primarily these are pieces of advertising. Quite often you'll see with graphic design the reappropriation. So while L. Liszewski used the circle as a geometric device, it's been taken across to represent a billiard ball. That's very common in graphic design. And it's common because it's sort of a double whammy. You get the progressive style to sort of cater to all of the purposes of advertising, but you also can marry that with the client's objective, which is, in this case, come here and we can play billiards, and you can play billiards. Okay, so this is another example. Barcozy, very, I mean, this one, it's crude by comparison, but what's interesting about it in terms of graphic design history is, and again, the appropriation and the way graphic designers' minds work, because often you're working at great speed and the pressure is actually to draw on exactly what is on trend at the moment. So the poster on the left is by Austin Cooper. So he was a Canadian graphic designer who moved to London and did a lot of work for the London Underground. And being a graphic designer, I wouldn't be surprised if Barcozy is actually named after that poster, or somehow, even though the poster only deals with the two characters B and A, it's nothing to do with a bar. I mean, this is about, what is it, exhibition in the home. It's some sort of totally different subject altogether. An example I have, and I see this all the time, and it's for good reason. I mean, it's a way of actually producing work. It's a very logical approach. I did design, my favourite example to date, I designed a editorial spread for Rolling Stone magazine at one point for Tim Finn, the musician, and I saw it turn up as a Tim Tam ad. That's exactly how this sort of thing, that's why when I look at these I think, I know what's going on there. Okay, so shall I keep on going?
Yes. I did listen to my one. There we go.
Okay. So this label here, a really beautiful piece of design, and I would like to know who did it because I think it's someone who very sophisticated eye. Shiseido, it turns out, I found this online. So I don't know how the connection worked between it being in this book and then Shiseido actually using it. But Shiseido, they have a really long, very well-regarded history in graphic design. They were known to sort of poach the best graphic designers in 20th century graphic design.
Who are Shiseido?
So they're a cosmetics manufacturer, yeah. So that was just a lucky find online.
Are you proposing that the swipe, the steel goes from that the people people doing the match have taken it from the Shiseido ad?
I don't think it's a steal. I think it's a purchase of some kind. I would love to know what those Japanese characters say to confirm it. It could be a steal, but it's so direct.
It's not a Shiseido advertisement. I think it's actually for a barber's store.
A barber's store?
Strangely
So
enough,
how,
yeah.
before or after Shiseido?
Oh, well, it would have been after Shiseido.
Okay.
Because the design is definitely more stylish than perhaps a barber's store would be able to afford.
Do you want long, yellow, flowing locks? Come to...
Well, a barber or a beauty salon. I'm just
okay.
looking. I did make a few notes on it, but keep on going.
But it has a telephone number on it too, and one of the ways of dating Matchbox labels is by telephone numbers. If we could find out if that is Tokyo, and when did Tokyo, well, that must be very old if it's got a very small number like that.
Yes. That's early. That's early days of telephones in Tokyo, 3 numbers.
Okay, so the next part I was going to actually talk about something strange in the, something particular about the actual collection is that there's a lot of manufactured, mass-produced designs as the ones that we've seen, but there's a lot of hand-painted ones as well. So I've got several examples of that.
So in this book that we've got, in this scrapbook, the labels in the scrapbook have been handmade?
Some of them have.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, and at small scale, so not produced large to reduce down. And I think that they're mock-ups. I think whether they were mass-produced or somebody did actually purchase them for their business or to represent their business is unknown.
Or it could have been a sample book that was shown to prospective clients or prospective people as they visited shops and said, we could produce a design like that. Because you haven't shown any of the examples that don't have any text on them, but there is a couple of pages later on, perhaps, that, just the designs without any text on them.
Well, if there's no text, it wasn't advertising anything, really. In the sense that if they're going to advertise something, they needed some text on it too.
Yes, but it would be shown to a prospective client and say, we could put your name here and we could put this message there on it.
It's clearly not a production.
Yeah.
And Jerry, does that make sense if that booklet, that scrapbook was like a dealer's scrapbook?
Oh, absolutely. They were either given as gifts. If you were a merchant visiting Kobe in 1910, you might be given one of these as a gift. But generally, I think they were samples. And salesmen would go around and try and persuade you that this factory or this particular printer was the best one to choose for your needs. There are quite a lot of them still around. We were just discussing earlier, there's quite a lot of these still in circulation, and they're all very interesting.
So you mean the scrapbooks?
The scrapbooks,
Thank you. Yeah. Jen?
What interested me was that meant that and this happens quite commonly as well in graphic design, that the people producing them are quite separate to the clients. So there's a broker in between who's actually shopping their work. And okay.
The previous one, if you went back to, I'm very amused by the title of Botchan on the cafe Botchan, and it's referring to a novel from that period, 1920s. Perhaps early 30s, by Natsume Soseki, very, very famous 20th century novelist, called Botchan, referring to sort of the spoiled number one child of a family. And it's about this sort of, Bernard?
Yeah, it's me.
And that classic sort of stereotypical image of the spoiled boy who's again the dandy of this sort of new era of the 1930s, and this is a cafe that he would go to and sort of be pampered at.
Wow, yeah. So is the novel satirical?
Yeah, well, it's satirical, in a sense that it's making fun or sort of, it's a satire of that stereotype, which still exists to the day, sort of the number one child of a family who's been spoiled, and of course the number one child in Japan inherits all of the cash.
Yes, well, that's me.
And the family business, and then lives a life of illustrating books and comics.
Yes, that's me.
He's called Botchan.
Botchan?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So from today on...
Yeah. Bernard no longer. Yeah. And what's Karasumoridori down there?
Oh, well, that's the name of the street that the shop would be on, or that the tea room would be on. Yeah.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
In this one, you can also see the designers changed their mind or edited the designs. There's some white out, if it's clear on the actual screen. Yeah. But, I mean, very fine work with a brush, very small, I mean, at actual size. And then this is another example. And you can tell as well, these have been conceived to be that's a 3-colour print, and then later the black plate goes over with whatever the particulars are. So to me, that's somebody who's actually understands exactly the process and has designed it for a 3-colour, which the more colours that are used in production, the more expensive or the more elaborate the process. And then this one as well. This is an example where you can see the back cover, the spine and the front.
Mm.
Is that?
Kikuzu, it's a water flower, or the water chrysanthemum. Chrysanthemum, typical sort of flower of wealth and success, symbol of the imperial family in Japan. But, they're not used for the name of a restaurant, but great typeface for the kikusui, really, isn't it? Yeah.
Hand rendered. Yeah.
And so can I just ask, Jerry, is this, I've never seen a matchbook cover that wraps around, it has a spine.
Fairly unique to Japan, actually, and they're very devil to get off, as I'm sure Japanese collectors know. They used a particular glue on these that was very hard to separate. But yeah, it's unique to Japan, that type of printing and that type of size.
Thank you.
I think there's another example. Okay, this one as well is the 2 sides and the spine too. It's a bit of a mystery. I have wondered if this is put together by a novice because the others are more logical, the way the actual colours are put together. This one would be quite complicated to actually assemble,
Stout is
I think.
misspelled too.
Yeah. And it's interesting that on one side there's the, a serif typeface, and then so they're really hedging their bets.
Yeah, I think so.
With that one.
You turn it a particular way depending on whether you believe in this sort of design world or the other, in terms of showing off.
Maybe the broker made this one, sort of thinking, trying to get double bang. Okay, and then, so these are some ones where they have been mass-produced, and you can see the stipples in them, and these are examples where it's they've literally left, the designer has left room for whatever business it will be. So at this particular point, they've passed it over, and then the broker goes out, presumably, and actually looks for somebody who wants to actually buy the use of this design for their business.
Wayne, can we pass to you about that?
Very fashionable at that time. Again, it was connecting sort of the establishment, whether it was a cafe or a bar or whatever, it was connecting it with that type of fashionable, international type of place. But a lot of the Roman sort of characters are really, they're a phonetic sort of representation of the Japanese word, apart from tea room here, the ones you can recognise, but a lot of them are like the previous one. It's a Romanised reading of the Japanese word. Kikusui, like the water chrysanthemum, as we were discussing before. But yeah, fashion.
Yeah, and would they be empty signifiers for a lot of the audience? Like, do we have a bit of a reading on that? Is it just like, there's English writing?
People would know that if it was the phonetic sort of Romanisation of a Japanese word, people would have studied the Roman alphabet.
People would have known.
Botchan would, it's sort of since the turn of the century, people would have been learning the Roman alphabet.
Okay.
And then the Romanised sort of spelling of Japanese words. Same as in China with the pinyin spelling, educated people will all be able to read the Romanised pinyin. Yeah.
What do you make of this particular design?
Well, the sort of the Moroccan or the African sort of connection was a very popular sort of nightclub cafe sort of theme in the US or in Europe at that time, and I think again it's picking up directly from that.
And this one's going on towards Art Deco, I presume, a little later. And then this again is the hallmark of the commercial artist or graphic designer, because sort of taking on the Englishness and pretending to be English for a...
But the identity of the tea room where you go and have an English cup of tea, where ladies would go, and it's taking the design off a teacup type
very
of...
clearly signalled.
Yeah.
Sorry, but Jerry, could you talk to us a little bit about landscape versus portrait orientation? Like usually matchboxes are a portrait, aren't they? Is that
No, the vast majority are landscape, and Japanese particularly, I would say about 80% are.
wow, right? Not redheads though.
No, not redhead, but overall, there seems to be a preference for landscape in matchboxes worldwide.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, pretty much, they've just got a couple left. So Kirin Beer, which we know well. I think this is beautiful. That's a sign of a very skilled designer.
Great stuff.
Yeah, really beautiful. And this is interesting in that so on the left, it's a design by Tenon Moyo Kagami from the late 1890s, and it's a woodcut design. And the use of the negative space as a pictorial element obviously no type was intended to go on the one on the left, but then the commercial appropriation of that is, yes, the negative space is the hand, but also it will accommodate type. So that's a nice connection to the Japanese traditional history. And this last frame, sorry about that, that's a book cover done by Moriyama, who we met in the earlier portrait, and he went on to do a lot of children's book designs with his wife and made, the bulk of his commercial income. And it's feasible, I think, because the techniques and styles are similar, that I think it would be interesting to find out if any Marvo artists or how far Marvo spread in the commercial into Matchbox labels.
This was a very famous magazine in the 1930s, Kodomo no Kuni, which is Children's World, basically it translates to, and it was very famous for the illustrators that were used, and it's become a real collector's item. It's something that actually I wouldn't mind trying to acquire for the collection. But it become a real collector's item around Jimbocho, sort of the second-hand book or the antique book district of Tokyo. But beautifully colour illustrations all the way through the magazine.
Any comics in there?
Pardon?
Comics.
Yeah, I think comic strips in there as well. But using the best illustrators in Japan was renowned for this. But the 12th month that says here, 11th month, sorry. Yeah.
And how big were they, Wayne?
Magazine size, probably a little bit larger than the normal size magazine we see in shops now.
Yeah,
which
right.
Was sort of the
big.
Yeah, somewhere between A4, A3 sort of size.
Gosh.
Yeah.
So take it home and put it on the floor and...
It was a real collectible for kids. It was one of those things that they would sort of, hedge at every month, for it to be released. Yeah.
And this from...
And the illustrators would become famous, they'd stake their career on being included in Children's World magazine, yeah.
Wow. Cool. Great. Thanks, Jenny. Shall we pass the pointer or the click? Do you want me to click for you, Jerry?
I wouldn't mind, thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, so let's pass to you.
Okay. The next, let's
go to
start the first one.
Yeah, okay.
That's right. I just produced for this presentation a few of the labels of that period made in Japan. But before I do that, I just might make the point that these labels we've been seeing, there's a distinction in the collecting world between a factory label and what we call a Cinderella. And if you went, say, into Western Australia and bought stamps from the Kingdom of Hutt, they would not be official stamps. They'd be known as Cinderellas to stamp collectors. And similarly, there's a whole series of advertising matchboxes which are not commissioned or made by match factories. The match factories just provide a box with matches in, and printers and other people actually fill them. And I'm sure that these are in that category.
These are all Cinderellas?
Not these, the ones we've been looking at.
The ones we've been looking at, okay.
We would call them Cinderellas because there is no indication of which factory made them. There was something like 300 factories in Japan over a period of 100 years or so, and I can't find one of them that's specialised in making those sorts of labels we've just seen.
Could you say that there's one of the distinguishing factors was the Cinderellas were sort of like specific ones for shops that they would have on the table, on the coffee table in a shop that you could souvenir, And the other type, which were the practical matches you would buy.
Well, you
sort of
bought
at
the matches
at the
to light
kiosk
the
at the
cigarette
railway
with.
station.
Yeah. You bought these for the advertising and probably chucked half the matches away.
And you get them for free, wouldn't you, at a bar?
You get
a
them
box
for free.
Yeah.
Well, people do it today. Everybody has a jar full of matches that they, matchboxes that they brought back from overseas.
Yeah.
Well, you do, Jerry. But
No, thank you, I don't. Okay, the ram and the boy on a cock were 1920s imports into Australia from Japan. Now, it makes sense to me to have a nice fleecy ram, but
Yeah, sure.
the boy on the cock is a very traditional Japanese design. I
with
think
impregnated.
It's interesting.
in a
That
banner.
it's sort of a European Kewpie on the
Yeah,
winged
it's-
Kewpie, isn't it?
Impregnated means that a substance has been put on the matchstick to stop to let the wood burn more slowly and to stop the head falling off.
Few.
But sometimes, and I have to say this, Japanese manufacturers in the early days used to put trademark and impregnated on their boxes, not knowing what they meant. They were never registered as a trademark because it was part of the design of the boxes they saw from Sweden
Sure.
and elsewhere.
Hang on a minute, this match is an impregnated? Yeah, I can tell. Yeah.
The middle two are fantastic Art Deco designs made in Japan for New Zealand. Timaru beer. Timaru is somewhere in South Island, I think.
It isn't. It's where Farlap was born.
There you go, you see. And Choice of Tea, I think, is still around in New Zealand. I've never found who made them, but the artwork, and there's a sheet upstairs of a lot more of them, are unique to New Zealand. And of course, New Zealand's the home of Art Deco. So that makes sense. And the two on the right, the Japanese were very interested in the Chinese Revolution post-World War I, when Dr. Sun Yat-sen took over from the emperors. And he is one of the three, and I'm not sure which one in the top label. But that five-coloured flag behind and then the blue flag with the star are both early flags for the new Republic of China. And Japan had a huge advantage in match manufacturing in that it was adjacent to India and to China, two enormous markets, neither of which in the 1920s had established match industries.
Wide open.
They didn't have the wood. They didn't grow the wood that good matches are made from, to start with.
But Japan did.
Japan did. And the two on the smiling face and the fat fellow are gods. I think the one on the right is called Hotai. Wayne will probably correct me.
No, that's true.
The one in the middle is, I've forgotten his name, the one with five faces, he's a god.
Ebisu.
And the other two are examples I took of commercial art from my collection, which is slightly different to the ones we saw, but again, very good and from that period. Now, the two on the right here are out of the period, but I thought I'd bring them along. They are propaganda labels for Malaya issued during World War II, and as you can see, Churchill and Roosevelt are running for their lives in the bottom one, and of course the naval might of Japan is illustrated in the top one. On the left are what they call legends, I think. The monkey in an oversized peach is either a person or a monkey shown in that, and that was actually sent to Australia. I don't know the significance of why it was, but it was one of the labels that was in circulation here in the 1920s.
And you were saying Kobe is a particular centre for match production.
The main centre for export match production in Japan was Kobe. There was, I think it's a suburb, Hyogo, is where most of the big factories were. And there were also some factories in Osaka, and I think Kobe is the port for Osaka, is it not?
Yeah. They both have, it's adjacent, yeah.
Yeah. So Kei Harima was one of the big Japanese factories of that time. Okay, we'll have the next one. On the left is traditional art. I think the one on the left is Utagawa, and the one in the middle is Hiroshige. Is that how you pronounce it? That's one of the 55 stages of the
definitely Hiroshige in the middle,
Yeah.
and perhaps Utamaro on the left.
They loved their traditional art, and they produced lots and lots and lots of sets of them.
Oh, sorry, Toyo Kuni on the left. It's got the name written there.
And you could, I found it. If you went to Tokyo railway station, that's where you bought all the good stuff. Maybe they kept it there for tourists, but for some reason, a lot of this stuff was available at the railway station. And on the right, this was all part of the Japan becoming a great mercantile nation. And of course, one of the things you need is a great fleet. And about half the shipping labels in the world emanate from Japan.
We've got a photograph down there on the lower right. Is that right? Or
no, I think that's an artistic rendition of. I don't think that's a photograph.
I think it might be at that time in printing history where the printing wasn't quite sophisticated enough, and that might be a poor reproduction of a photograph.
Might be.
It's got that, without taking a close look.
I don't know which shipping line that is. And in the two on the left come from what they call, I think, the Zaibatsu, the big, enormous companies that, in fact, rescued the Japanese match industry when it fell in a great hole in the 1930s. We know one name here, Mitsubishi. The one on the top is Mitsui, and the one below that is Suzuki, who I think went broke probably before the beginning of the Second World War. The two in the middle are exports to India, and they loved the artwork is fantastic. They just loved their exports to India, and they could really go to town with the gods and the royalty of India. And then, of course, towards the end of the 1930s, we saw the rise of militarism in Japan, and that is reflected on Matchbox labels, Admiral Togo and General Oyama, I think it is, and then the Army Navy box, which is quite well known and was exported at the time.
Yeah.
No.
These, I really only have two slides, but so I've spoken a bit, and then we might sort of get into more of a dialogue. But going back to the album that was purchased of the 1930s labels, these two appeared, and I just wanted to take these two examples of very traditional design that really throws back to Edo period advertising. And of course, Japan has this very long tradition of advertising, going back through really woodblock printing techniques that were developed during the Edo period, multi-block woodblock prints from about 1760, the ukiyo-e Nishiki-e prints, which developed into Utamaro and Sharaku and Hokusai and Hiroshige. But these multicolour woodblock printing techniques were used also for advertising. And these two, although they're from the 1930s, they're really throwing back to like traditional advertisement labels. The one on the left, White Snow, or Shirayuki, which for a brand of sake. And you see the sort of the sake cup, the red cup underneath the two characters there. And then the one on the right, which is advertising soya sauce, miso, and salt, I think, as three sort of daily sort of products that you would use at home. And just the design, the big barrel, the bottle, and the wooden sort of wall behind it. The ribbon character over the top has been sort of appropriated from European style design, but then the two banners on either side are quite traditional Japanese, sort of like banners that would be used to advertise outside of a sumo stadium, or even that samurai would sort of go into battle with these sticks with banners sort of flattering behind them, stating their allegiance to whichever general they were fighting with. So again, it's this amazing sort of combination of different design elements. But the design of these two very traditional in that sort of Edo period form of advertising. And then the next slide that I have as something which is really moving into this modernist feeling, this great confidence of the 1930s, which is a period, it's a little window really between, as was being pointed out by Bernard earlier on, that 1868 was the time when the feudal era finished, the end of the Edo period, the beginning of the Meiji period. The Meiji period went right through till 1912. And it was a time, an era where the samurai sort of lost their social position and they donned top hat and tails that you sort of see in these strange sort of appearances of them, adapting formal European costume. And a lot of the more traditional sort of Matchbox labels that we were looking at with Jerry are from that Meiji period. And then from in one of the big sort of changing point in Japanese history around that time was 1923, and some of you would know that was the great Kanto earthquake which hit Tokyo in 1923. The great Kanto earthquake, which basically flattened Tokyo, and what wasn't flattened, the fires went through and destroyed the rest of it. And the government went on a big policy of rebuilding Japan from 1923, and there was this window from that period up till the late 30s, let's say 1940, when militarism sort of had gained big momentum and it took over Japan. And this window of sort of the swinging 20s and 30s came to a crushing halt. But during that small period of only 17 years, Tokyo was basically rebuilt with great optimism and style and fashion of a modern metropolis. You've also got to remember that Japan at that time, were emulating European colonial powers. The emperors had travelled to Europe, they'd met the kings of all the European countries, they went back to Japan. They'd actually established this empire in Japan, which included the Korean Peninsula, Taiwan, Manchuria. That they were sort of riding high on optimism. They were adapting a lot of these Art Deco style and fashion and graphic design aesthetics that we've sort of covered earlier on, and that was seen to represent this new lifestyle, along with rebuilding the first subway created in Asia, the line which went from Asakusa to Ginza, the first subway created only 2 or 3 years after the great earthquake in 23 was opened. Dance halls, movie theatres, department stores, and then the lifestyle that went around that of hanging out, the dandies hanging out in cafes, nightclubs. It was the first liberated generation of women. Up until that point, women had been, really had to stay at home and look after the family and look after home chores. But all of a sudden, with all of these new work opportunities happening in Tokyo, a lot of women from the countryside flooded into the city to take up jobs in cafes, movie theatres, restaurants, dance halls, etc. And they were really the first liberated generation of middle class or working class women in Asia from the 1920s through to the 1930s, and the first generation of women with a disposable income to spend it on what they wanted to do. Now, if you go to Japan nowadays, you go to Shibuya and you've got all of the sort of the Harajuku, and you've got all of the sort of the crazy sort of cosplay culture or dressing up sort of culture. In the 1920s, this first generation of financially liberated women were out there buying very brightly coloured kimono, the sort of things that aristocratic girls would never think of wearing, but they were there in department stores, and they were really part of this sort of burgeoning economy of that period. And you see this represented in these amazing sort of Art Deco designs that we see here for Bar Catch, or again another, perhaps the same cafe tea room we're talking about the spoiled boy, Botchan. And this spilled over into kimono design for women and men. A lot of painters were involved in this avant-garde movement. Woodblock prints had a huge revival during that period of displaying the lifestyle of the modern girl and the modern boy that they were known at that time. And people would go out promenading up and down in the Ginza in their latest sort of costumes and going about their daily life. And the book that was purchased by the library in 2012 is really a brilliant little sort of,
capsule of that.
A time capsule of this optimism that, of course, came to a crushing halt and was stamped out by the militarism of sort of 1937 up until 1940, and then, of course, Japan was thrown into poverty after the war, where people had to sell all their kimonos off and go back to sort of trying to scrounge a living from buying food off the black market and whatever.
Brilliant rap, Wayne Crothers. Because that's us at time, so it's 7 o'clock now. So I'm going to say, let us thank our wonderful panel who've enlightened this topic for us.